Hello, happy Canada Day to our Canadian listeners, happy 4th of July to all of our American listeners, and welcome to episode 179 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty, and I'm flying solo on the show today. A few weeks ago, I proposed a re-theme of Spaceship Earth in Epcot. In honor of Independence Day in the United States, I'm going to propose a re-theme to the American Adventure in the U.S. Pavilion in Epcot. While this reimagining is going to focus mostly on the show, I'm going to suggest a revamping to a lot of different aspects of the pavilion. Also, I wanted to start this episode with some of my thoughts on the changes to the DAS, Disability Access Service at Walt Disney World. These changes have been very controversial, and the most diplomatic way I can state this is the original implementation has been a mixed bag. Before we get started with those two topics, I would like to ask everyone to make sure that you are subscribed to the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel. Those of you who are subscribed, take time to comment on all of the videos and podcasts with something positive. It only takes a few minutes, but it really helps us reach a new audience. There are a lot of reasons to want to be following along with us in the near future. We're still doing great theme park content, including covering my marathon day in the parks for my birthday last month. I'm taking you along for hiking trails, baseball games, and so much more. Next month, I have media credentials for Tampa Bay Comic-Con. I'm going to keep expanding what we do here to cover more aspects of travel and pop culture. I also wanted to say a huge thank you because we hit a big milestone last week. It has now been 2 straight years where every episode of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty has hit over 1,000 views on YouTube, most of the time within the first week, usually within the first 2 weeks. That is amazing. Many of these episodes have gone as high as 10,000 views on YouTube, but at least hitting 1,000 views for 2 straight years is something about which I will always be incredibly proud. You are also listening on the other formats, and I appreciate that as well. But 2 years of at least 1,000 people per episode is something I never would have imagined would have happened when I started this podcast in early 2021. Right now, I'm going to start with the first segment in today's episode. It was announced back in May that Walt Disney World and Disneyland were both going to be changing their systems for DAS passes. As I have mentioned in the past, my wife Courtney suffers from chronic illness. My co-host Maz has some severe health issues. My co-host Sarah Says has a son who is on the autism spectrum, and her husband has a disability, and I am also autistic. This podcast has always set out to have the goal of inclusion. As a matter of fact, I have accepted a speaking engagement later this month to talk about why I felt that inclusion was such an important part of this podcast from the moment I started it. One of the things that always drew me to the Walt Disney World theme parks was the dedication to accommodating different types of guests. Of course, today we're talking about disabilities, but Disney has had a long reputation of trying to make the parks places where everyone can go to forget the outside world. They eventually embraced gay days. They made rides accessible for people in wheelchairs and larger people. A large percentage of rides in all 6 of the U.S. Disney parks can be ridden by kids all the way up to grandparents. As a vegetarian, I've had more luck finding meal options that work for me and are actually good food than at any other major tourist attraction. We recently did an episode where my wife talked about being confined to a wheelchair for an entire weekend visit to WDW. Park maps are written in multiple different languages, including Mandarin, Japanese, Portuguese, French, Spanish, and more. Even the content of the attractions made it fun for almost everyone. There might be some jokes that are on the verge of being risque, but most of them are tame enough that you don't blush if you're sitting next to your grandmother. This commitment to inclusion seemed to be about more than just being moral. It always seemed like Disney knew that the more people you could accommodate, the more likely they would come to the parks. Plus, most families have someone with disabilities, allergies, or other issues. If you make sure those things aren't obstacles, you stand to make more money. Using Universal as an example, they have focused more on thrill rides than Disney. While Disney has some roller coasters, it is nothing like Velocicoaster. Needing restraints that keep people safe on a ride like the Incredible Hulk roller coaster at Universal's Islands of Adventure will limit the people who can actually ride the attraction. Bigger people cannot ride. Smaller people cannot ride. There are a lot of people who just prefer rides that are calmer than those options. That's a business decision Universal made because Disney had created that niche in the market. I think this is an important part of the narrative. People are going to be harder on Disney when it comes to this topic because Disney has actively promoted their parks as places that will do whatever it takes to accommodate guests. As has been pointed out by many online, Disney never had to do this. Of course not. Disney just has to follow the Americans with Disabilities Act and do the bare minimum. That being said, the bare minimum was never why people booked Disney vacations. They set these expectations, they advertised these expectations. They can't now be surprised that guests want to hold them to those expectations. Let's talk about the physical changes to the DAS system. Before May 20th of this year, guests had two options for applying for a disability access pass. Fairly recently, Disney added a function to pre-register before your vacation. This happened online, and I've talked to a number of people who applied in that manner, and it seemed to be a smooth process. In person, a guest who needed special accommodations would visit one of the main guest service locations in the theme parks. When talking about Walt Disney World, this was in Town Square at the Town Hall building for Magic Kingdom, in between Spaceship Earth and Creations Cafe in Epcot, to the left of the entrance, right in the front of Disney's Hollywood Studios, and in the Oasis, also to the left of the entrance in Disney's Animal Kingdom. A cast member would ask guests why they are unable to wait in long lines. Despite what is being claimed by many in the online community, this was not limited to neurological disabilities like autism. If you could not stand for a long queue or sit in a wheelchair in a long queue, you stood a very good chance of getting approved. Once a guest was approved for a DAS pass, which would be good for 60 days, things got much better for everyone involved. On the My Disney Experience app, the rider needing assistance could look at ride wait times. Let's say, for example, this person was spending the day at Disney's Hollywood Studios, the Walt Disney World park with the worst reputation for producing long lines. The rider wanted to start her day with Star Wars Rise of the Resistance. After meeting with guest services, let's say the park was already open for 30 minutes before she really was ready to pick an attraction, so Rise had already built a 75-minute wait. Our disabled guest could make a return time for Rise of the Resistance and was told when to return. More than likely, that return time was almost all of the 75 minutes posted. Whenever her return time was called, she could make her way back to Rise of the Resistance and enter through the Lightning Lane queue. Anyone who's used Genie Plus is probably wondering how this system was different. Actually, it was different in a lot of ways. Those who have become experts at using Genie Plus have created a trick called stacking rides. This is when they manipulate the windows for when they can select rides so that they're putting all of their lightning lanes in short succession during the day. In this scenario, they can just run from one high-demand ride to another without having to wait for any of them. Under the former DAS system, guests could only hold one ride at a time. For all intents and purposes, the DAS user was waiting in line for the attraction. Because it was attached to the app, Disney knew exactly how many DAS passes were out for a ride at any given time, knew how many lightning lanes were out for that ride, and they were able to incorporate that information into the calculation of wait times. This system was not like a fast pass or a lightning lane because the rider had to wait the entire queue, but the physical waiting was able to be done in an area that was near a bathroom, less stimulating to sensory overload, or where they could take medications and have air conditioning. Because many disabled people can't always guarantee that they will be available in a particular window, the DAS selection would be good for the rest of the day until it was used. Unlike a lightning lane where there's an hour window, guests with a DAS could take care of their physical needs and then arrive at the attraction when it made sense for them. Until they submitted the DAS pass, however, they could not make one for another attraction until they used that initial DAS or canceled it. Getting back to my previous example of the woman waiting 75 minutes to ride Star Wars Rise of the Resistance, after she scanned into the ride with her party, a party that had to be set up at the beginning of the day, she could then book a DAS pass for another ride in the park. She would not, however, be able to book a ride at Magic Kingdom, Epcot, or Disney's Animal Kingdom while she was in Hollywood Studios. Let's say she saw that Slinky Dog Dash was now at a 90-minute wait and the temperature outside had already hit triple digits. She makes a DAS for Slinky as she gets off of Rise. The park is packed. People are bumping into her, her blood sugar's dropping. Instead of having to enter the Slinky Dog Dash queue for the chance to ride that attraction, she's able to go upstairs at Pizza Rizzo. There is a corner of the restaurant with no other park goers, and someone else in her party gets her a small snack and a free ice water. Now she doesn't have to worry about ruining the trip for anyone who's tasked with waiting for her, and she will be able to ride the same number of rides as anyone who doesn't have DAS. Starting on May 20th of this year, almost everything about the system changed. And yes, I understand that there are changes coming to the Genie Plus Lightning Lane system as well. We're going to get into those in a future episode. Disney is now using a third-party company to make these decisions on DAS. And the third-party company is no longer using a one-size-fits-all approach to finding a solution for disabled guests. Anyone who's been listening for the past 3.5 years know that I try to keep things positive, but I will say when I don't like something. With that in mind, I'm going to start with the negatives that I have seen, heard about, or anticipate from the new system. After that, I will address the positives of the new system, and I have already heard of some of those. Obviously, the first day of the new system was a nightmare for guests. The most short-sighted thing Disney did in this entire transition was having all existing DAS passes end on May 20th, while also refusing to allow people to apply for a DAS for their summer vacations until May 20th. I understand that Disney was trying to prevent people from sharing the information, but no matter when you start letting people apply, the cat would be out of the bag pretty quickly. I used to be a travel agent, and I talked to many travel agents who had clients trying to navigate the system. There were stories of hold times exceeding 2.5 hours without giving any estimate on a wait time. Calls were disconnected, and Disney shut down accepting any new requests in the early evening because they believed they would be dealing with the backlog until after their 11 o'clock end time. One of the reasons this happened is because everyone has to go through the application process online. You can still apply for accessibility when you're in the parks, but you are still talking to a cast member who is at a separate location. The person with the disability needs to be on the call, which is a video call on the My Disney Experience app. The qualifications have changed as well. It seems as if Disney is limiting the DAS pass to neurodivergent guests. Disabled people with physical ailments will now be given alternate solutions. I think this has always been the most unpopular part of the program because the worry is that it will put the burden for enforcement on individual cast members at each individual attraction. This means that the accommodations for any individual guest could look completely different even if they suffer from the same disability on paper. Part of me understands why Disney would do this. Every disability is different, so the remedy being a cookie cutter system isn't helping anyone. The problem with that is every disability being different, cast members will be tasked with dealing with a variety of ailments every day. A prime example is guests with digestive disorders. Disney is trying to implement new procedures to allow guests to leave the queue to use the restroom and return to rejoin their parties. To many people, this may seem like a reasonable accommodation, but I worry about a few things. First of all, people who don't have digestive disorders may use this new flexibility in queue management to actually skip the line. They could leave and go get some popcorn and relax for 20 minutes. Also, people with disabilities who previously would have had a DAS will now be subjected to the gaze of everyone in the queue they are passing to meet up with their party. We know how people can be judgmental, especially with invisible disabilities. One of the beauties of the DAS entrance and Lightning Lane entrance being the same was that nobody had reason to question disabilities because they didn't know why someone was there. The second problem with this scenario is a big one, and that is guests who are on solo trips. You can't meet up with your party if you are the only person in your party. Hopefully Disney is planning for these things, but I worry about people falling through the cracks. Another thing that bothers me about the new system is that you need a park ticket or park reservation to apply. I have yet to hear of a person who is denied proper accommodations is able to cancel their park tickets and get a full refund. This also goes for annual pass holders who qualified under the previous system but don't anymore. Now, I want to move on to the positives of the new system because I have noticed many of them. Speaking to somebody who's an expert on these things is much better than making guest relations cast members in charge of the decisions. I have said before that I don't think Disney is hiring a third-party company to award more DAS passes, but when the kinks are worked out in the system, I'm glad that CMs who just want to make magical vacations aren't put in these awkward situations. The new system also does one thing that is imperative to trying to discourage fraud. It states that if a guest lies during the application process, they can be banned from the Disney parks for life. Proponents of the changes have been barking about how they think disabled people are all lying to get DAS passes. I do think that the threat of a ban is a serious one. Nobody wants people who lie to be able to take advantage of the system. My issues have always been that I don't want people who told the truth in the past to be denied in the future as long as they continue to tell the truth. Another accusation has been that disabled people were sort of selling their services as tour guides at the Disney parks. Allegedly, these disabled people would offer to go to the parks with vacationing families in exchange for money. At the time, guests were easily added to somebody's DAS group. Many people even claim that the disabled person wouldn't even end up riding the ride with the family. Listen, I don't know exactly why someone would pay a stranger for a 12-hour day when they could get Genie Plus for actual lightning lanes that can be stacked for $15 to $20 per person. The math isn't mathing for me on this particular conspiracy theory. That being said, Disney is addressing this. Friends and family have to be pre-selected before applying for any disability services. If this was happening, it required adding people after the original disabled person was already granted a DAS pass. This feature is so new that I don't know of anyone adding somebody to their friends and family after being approved, but I know that those friends and family members are given scrutiny under this new system. In addition, a disabled person is limited to 3 guests at any given time. That means that you can't hire one disabled person to get your family of 7 onto Frozen Ever After. I believe there are accommodations for legal family members, so I think this works in most situations. Remember, Disney is promising to work with people on an individual basis. Finally, I am confident that Disney will adjust if they see this system causing them too many problems. The important thing is for all of us to do the busy work sometimes. Fill out the survey after calling Disney. Talk to your travel agents. Post on social media. They can't fix problems if they don't know about them. Talking to travel agents, their clients had a much easier time in the second week of the new system than the first week. That makes me think that Disney is trying to smooth out the rough edges. The worst part of these announcements had nothing to do with the Disney company, however. As with so many other things, it was the Disney fan community. I had disabled friends bullied and told that they shouldn't even be permitted to go to the theme parks because able-bodied guests don't want them there. I've seen Twitter accounts with thousands of followers saying that all disabled people are lying and make claims about disabled people that simply aren't true. My wife Courtney is disabled. She does not qualify for a DAS pass under this new system. I'm not complaining. She's not complaining. I'm just stating a fact. No able-bodied person in the world would trade dealing with the things she deals with on a regular basis so that they can wait 10 fewer minutes for the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh. Between doctor visits and the amount of energy she exerts at work, she may be able to go to the theme parks once every other month at most. When she does get to go to the parks, it's sometimes the lone bright spot in her month. Her face lights up when I remind her about upcoming visits. For a lot of people with disabilities, Disney is the only place where they can feel normal. To be jealous of disabled people because a certain percentage of them get to go through the lightning lane for Journey of the Little Mermaid is sick. Most of these people behaving this way are grown men. Just stop it. Now I'm going to move on to my second topic of the episode. Hopefully this one will be a little more fun than just being informative. So many of you enjoyed my pitch for how to retheme Spaceship Earth that I decided the 4th of July would be the perfect time to do a make-believe update to a patriotic attraction. The American Adventure is a really great show, but it is obvious that some parts of it are outdated. I think there's some areas that they would even like to have back in retrospect. When you enter the colonial-style building, you're greeted by off-white walls and a beautiful room that was specifically designed to be acoustically perfect for the Voices of Liberty. I would not make a single change to the structure of the room. As for the Voices of Liberty themselves, they're obviously staying, and I actually like their new, sleeker outfits. Some people have complained about the loss of the colonial-era styles, but I felt those were a little too silly for the serious nature of the Voices of Liberty. My major pre-show change would have to come with the quotes that are on the walls in the lobby. This type of attraction should not be overtly political. Of course, it's difficult to keep politics completely out of something like this, but having a quote from Ayn Rand is idiotic, especially since she isn't even an American. I love the idea of having quotes about the American spirit. So many amazing writers like Walt Whitman, John Steinbeck, even poets and musicians like Bob Dylan and Woody Guthrie. This should focus on the people of the United States over the political divisions and corporate interests. Moving on to the show itself, it starts with animatronic versions of our two hosts, Benjamin Franklin and Mark Twain. It's been mentioned by others that a third host should be added. Franklin from the 18th century, Twain from the 19th, and putting a representative from the 20th century. People have suggested Martin Luther King Jr. That hits me the wrong way because I think it goes further towards the Santa Clausification of MLK. Turning somebody who was investigated by the CIA and FBI for his radical beliefs into a milquetoast patriotic character is disingenuous. The nature of the script would force King to gloss over some things that were very offensive to him. Walter Cronkite, who was considered the most trusted man in the country when he anchored the news, would be a natural, non-political figure who would also come with some Epcot history. Cronkite was one of the former voices of Spaceship Earth. Neil Armstrong would be another amazing choice. The first man to walk on the moon, with the founding father and one of the greatest writers of all time. It would be a perfect fit. Vin Scully, Dick Clark, Frank Sinatra, and Lucille Ball are some other possibilities to fill that third chair. My pick, however, would be Neil Armstrong. In the current incarnation, Franklin starts with the Pilgrims coming over for religious freedom, but I think it would be better to start with the founding of the nation itself. I thought that maybe starting with Jamestown and focusing on the industrious nature of those who came to the New World in the early days would make sense. Thinking more about it, however, I think the revolution is when people in the colonies started to view themselves as being Americans more than British subjects. Definitely keep the phenomenal scene when an animatronic Thomas Jefferson is writing the Declaration of Independence and Franklin actually walks up the steps to push him to finish it. The animatronic walking is the highlight of the entire attraction. Of course, the scene from Valley Forge, which focuses on the rank and file soldiers who are struggling and just shows a seemingly dejected General Washington in the background, is epic. At this show's best, it keeps the attention on the American people and doesn't turn it into a celebration of leaders like the Hall of Presidents. There are some times when it does lean a little too far in that direction, and we'll talk about those times later. Talking a little bit more about the fights between the different factions in Philadelphia during the creation of the country would also be great. Franklin could say something like, "We got a lot of things right in Philadelphia, but we left quite a few problems for future generations to solve." That would be a perfect setup for the Civil War. As a matter of fact, the Civil War segment is the one thing I think has aged the absolute worst. It starts with a family in animatronic form posing for a picture. Of course, that was a rare event in the 1860s, so the family's there for the mother's birthday. The two brothers in the family are fighting over the Civil War, with one signed up to fight for the Union and one signed up to fight for the Confederacy. That scene leads into a video montage during the song Two Brothers. This song also plays at great moments with Mr. Lincoln at Disneyland, and I hate it for so many reasons. To paraphrase the lyrics, it claims that one of the brothers wore blue and one wore gray, and that one was gentle and one was kind. First of all, somebody who fights for the preservation of slavery is neither gentle nor kind. Secondly, casting off the differences as one wearing blue and one wearing gray is an almost comically negligent characterization of the situation. Finally, I hate the idea of it being two brothers from the same family. I wouldn't say this film falls into lost cause propaganda. However, it gets dangerously close to that line. Having the animatronic scene of Frederick Douglass talking about Uncle Tom's Cabin, and then having Twain say to Franklin, "Brave Americans like Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and John Brown stirred up a nation to take the torch of the founding fathers and start to include more people in their dream of freedom." At this point, you use the same animatronic family. This time, both of the brothers are signing up for the Union Army. The father doesn't want them risking their lives for emancipation, even though he wants the Union to stay intact. He's afraid of losing one or both of his boys. History books that are way too complimentary towards the South tend to gloss over the fact that there were really three political factions leading into the Civil War. Yes, much is made of the abolitionists and those who wanted to preserve slavery at all costs. By making there only two sides, it makes it seem like the people who wanted to preserve slavery could have been some of the moderates. But in the North, there was a slight more conservative faction that wanted to preserve the Union, prevent slavery from spreading, but wasn't on the side of the radical Republicans like Thaddeus Stevens of Pennsylvania. I would hope that you would be hard-pressed to find somebody in 2024 who would argue on the side of slavery. So having the older generation stating a more moderate position while the sons both eagerly head out to fight the enemy would be a paradigm I think many guests would be able to recognize. This show is too positive towards the U.S. to get into a tough conversation about the South's motives. Epcot isn't the place for that conversation, but it is a conversation that should be had in schools. As an education major who was planning on becoming a history teacher in my 20s, the efforts of many southern states to gloss over the reasons for the Civil War are disturbing. The classroom is where this conversation should be had, and not a theme park with a Muppets restaurant next to the theater's exit. Naturally, the current show moves on to westward expansion and is capped off with a speech from Chief Joseph talking about how his people lost their land during the country's fascination with manifest destiny. I think this part should be a little shorter and focus more on the excitement of the West. I would love a quick mention of Billy the Kid and Pat Garrett, cover the myth of the cowboy, and then Chief Joseph's speech would still wrap up this segment. I would keep the 1876 centennial celebration from Philadelphia. I like having Susan B. Anthony, Andrew Carnegie, and Alexander Graham Bell. Instead of having Mark Twain as the fourth figure on stage here, however, I would put Neil Armstrong. He could talk about Susan B. Anthony's battle for equality leading to the black women who played a huge part in the mathematical aspects of the space program. Of course, the communication networks Bell pioneered, combined with Carnegie Steel, all played a part in taking Reconstruction-era America from wagons to 1960s spaceships. The first animatronic segment that I would scrap would be Teddy Roosevelt preserving the national parks. I understand why they added this, but too much history has happened since this show was created, and we need to create some space. This is a little bit too much of that great man history I was talking about earlier. Going from 1876 into World War I is fine in my opinion. Keeping World War I as a video segment works. This could lead into the current animatronic scene with the rural Americans at a general store talking about the Depression and leading into FDR and eventually Will Rogers teasing World War II. Most definitely having the women working over the holiday season on fixing the military equipment is staying. The animatronics are impressive, and the sound of the radio playing I'll Be Home for Christmas in that context is so beautiful. Many people don't know that song was written about World War II. This is the point in the current show where they lead into the song and a video montage of famous Americans. I would add one more animatronic scene that shows MLK's I Have a Dream speech, but from the perspective of the people in the crowd. And then onto the other side of the stage, the audio morphs into Neil Armstrong as his animatronic climbs down from the ladder and walks on the moon. You hear that famous, if not grammatically confused phrase, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." After walking on the moon, then I would go into the montage. I'm sorry if you like it, but the song has to change. America, Spread Your Golden Wings has too much of an expansionist vibe. I would love if they would just have a choir or some other artist do a cover of This Land Is Your Land by Woody Guthrie. It would fit the theme of regular people making a difference in the American story. The montage itself always leaves me inspired. The biggest thing I would change from it would be to take some of the more controversial figures like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos out of the mix. It could also be updated to put LeBron James in a Lakers jersey and maybe add Taylor Swift with some of the musicians. I might even add Lin-Manuel Miranda and Daveed Diggs performing together in Hamilton. Still, I always loved seeing Cesar Chavez, Alex Haley, Jackie Robinson, Billie Jean King, Bob Dylan, Frank Sinatra, and so many other incredible Americans. Instead of ending the show with Ben Franklin and Mark Twain on the torch of the Statue of Liberty, I would have Franklin, Twain, and Armstrong with the skyline of Los Angeles in the background. This would be a symbol of the nation stretching from sea to shining sea. Especially with the events of recent years, you definitely want there to be a tone that America has been flawed from its entire existence, with tough battles to be fought, but that the people have come together in moments of importance like the Civil War and World War II. There you have it. Those are the changes that I would make to the American Adventure in Epcot's World Showcase. With everything happening in the world, I know this 4th of July is going to be a hard one for many of my listeners, especially in the US. It might be hard to feel patriotic, and I get that. Still, I think of my grandfather going over to England during World War II, even though he had to be scared out of his mind. I think about Lydia Hamilton Smith, who lived in my hometown of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and was one of the first black women in the Keystone State to own property and used that property to hide runaway slaves on the Underground Railroad. We have had heroes throughout the almost 250 years of this country, and we can all try to use our platforms to do better. This has been episode 179 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Let me know what you think about my ideas to update the American Adventure show at Epcot by commenting. As always, make sure you are subscribed to the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel. Watch and like videos, and tell your Disney and travel-loving friends. We will be back with a brand new episode next Thursday. Maz will be back on the show, and the two of us will finish our attraction tier list of Disney's Hollywood Studios. Until then, have a great week.